in this supplementary budget. Secondly, Honorable Speaker, is that when we are doing the budgeting for a country, we use financial years. That is from June to June. But when the country is doing other arrangements, for example, education, we do that cognizant of the calendar year. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, one of the other reasons that we did this supplementary budget in regards to figures is that we needed to capacitate our education sector by capitalizing it more. So what we have done in that regard, Honorable Speaker, is that we have added but over 70 billion Kenya shillings into our education sector. Honorable Speaker, it is important that I let the members know that our education sector currently is taking up 700 billion Kenya shillings of our budget, which is commendable, Honorable Speaker, because these are monies that are going into the tomorrow of our country. And Honorable Speaker, this is an investment. Honorable Speaker, out of that money that is going to education, 5.4 billion Kenya shillings is going into JSS capitation, because we are adding much more money into JSS so that parents do not have to cough money out of their pockets come January, and especially for those who will be joining JSS in January. Honorable Speaker, secondly, we have been able to add over 20 billion Kenya shillings into our higher education. Honorable Speaker, we have capitalized our help more to be able to give loans to higher education students and also to provide scholarships to higher education students and especially universities. Honorable Speaker, also we have added over 5 billion Kenya shillings into our TVETs. This money is going into payments of scholarships also to TVET students. Honorable Speaker, there is something I also want members to put a keen listening ear on. Honorable Speaker, in education, and Honorable Speaker, is important for members to note, we have added an extra 3.4 billion Kenya shillings into JSS infrastructure, that is laboratories, and that is other infrastructure related to JSS. And something we have done is that we have moved this money from the Ministry of Education. In this appropriations bill, if you check, 3.4 billion Kenya shillings we removed from the Ministry of Education, and we took that money to the Department of Planning so that that money goes to NGCDF for these members of this House to manage the construction of JSS infrastructure. Secondly, Honorable Speaker, we have been able to add 1 billion Kenya shillings. You know, Honorable Speaker, Nairobi is our capital. Whether we come from any other area of the country, from Murang'a to Taveta to Marsabit, to Iraret in Marsabit, or any other area, Nairobi is still our pride as our capital. But Honorable Speaker, Nairobi County has the highest number of school-going children who have no access to education. So what we have done in that regard is that we have added Nairobi County Kenya shillings 1 billion, monies that will go into enhancing infrastructure in our primary schools and secondary schools within Nairobi, because statistics in the Ministry of Education is very clear that Nairobi County is much more disadvantaged when it comes to infrastructure, and that is why many school-going children are not able to access education. Honorable Speaker, the third thing that made us have this supplementary budget is primarily the domain of our economy. The domain of our economy is that Kenya is still agrarian in nature. Honorable Speaker, agriculture employs the bulk of the Kenyan citizens. Actually, in rural areas, 70% of the residents in rural areas are employed by the value chains around agriculture. And Honorable Speaker, what we have done is that we have added 8.25 billion Kenya shillings into fertilizer subsidy for the next season. Honorable Speaker, we have also added more NCPB to mop up maize, Honorable Speaker, and we have also added monies for post-harvest management when it comes to maize, because we are expecting a bumper harvest as farmers are harvesting. And therefore, Honorable Speaker, we were able to add more money that will go into that. Secondly, within agriculture, I have good news for the areas that are represented by members here of Kenyans who do sugar farming, because we were able to add, Honorable Speaker, close to Kenya shillings 2 billion into sugar reforms. And these sugar reforms, Honorable Speaker, number one is to help our factories to be able to procure sugarcane using sucrose level. But also number two, we have input over close to 1.5 billion Kenya shillings into payment of arrears of sugar farmers who are owed monies of sugarcane that they have already provided. Honorable Speaker, we also have good news for farmers of Kenya who are engaged in coffee production, because we have added Kenya shillings 4 billion into coffee farming and specifically into coffee cherry farm, so that the farmers of Kenya who do a marvelous job in terms of balancing our payments, Honorable Speaker, to be able to produce more coffee, and that is why we have recapitalized the coffee revolving fund, Honorable Speaker, with Kenya shillings 4 billion. Honorable Speaker, there are much more that we have been able to do in these supplementary estimates, because we believe that a country that is run by people is dynamic. And therefore, the budget that we made in June, a lot has happened. And therefore, we just needed to align the government resources to be able to go into areas that we deem have very high or are much more effective in terms of turning around inputs into outputs. And Honorable Speaker, agriculture has been seen to be a part of that. As I come to the conclusion, it is important, because budget making process affects the entire economy, that I highlight one area that members have been asking. Members have been asking, why is our currency decimated? Why is our currency on the receiving end in regards to other global currencies? Honorable Speaker, for the last 11 times that the Federal Reserve has met, that is the Federal Reserve of the US, they have consistently been raising interest rates. In January of 2022, the Federal Reserve rate in the US was in the band of 0% to 0.25%. They have then raised interest rates for 11 consecutive times, up to now the band of 5.25% to 5.5%. How is that related to the Kenyan shilling? Honorable Speaker, what has happened? When the US raises interest rates, there is capital flight from all the other emerging economies like Kenya and the rest. And therefore, we have seen a lot of capital outflows from emerging economies like Kenya. Of course, the investors going into the US, where they don't need to worry about currency devaluation. Honorable Speaker, the second thing is the regime of the central bank. Honorable Speaker, the central bank has 3 critical areas that it needs to do other than regulation of the financial institutions. And the critical role of the central bank is to set prices. And there are 3 categories of prices. One, there is prices of commodities, which we call inflation. Then there is the price of money, which we now use interest rates. But then there is the price of the domestic currency, which is forex or exchange rate, Honorable Speaker. And Honorable Speaker, the regime of the central bank affects how the domestic currency or the direction it takes. For the past 6 years, we have seen in Kenya that the central bank, whereas we are known that Kenya has a floating exchange rate regime where it is a matter of demand and supply, within that floating regime, there are 2 categories. There is the managed